5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to Las Vegas. Formula One is back in Sin City, and I'd love to say to you that I was talking to you from the iconic Strip or even the Formula One circuit itself, but such is the strange schedule we have this weekend. We are still at the hotel. So welcome to room 6309 here at the MGM Grand. I'm Rosanna Tennant and I'm joined by the full team. We've got the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson here, our lead commentator Harry Benjamin and former W Series driver Alice Powell. It is glamour, 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 guys. Viva Las Vegas. Harry, you haven't been to this incredible city before. What have you been up to? Any highlights of the trip so far?
Well, apart from witnessing, the low lighting in producer Paddy's hotel room, I feel like as soon as we got here, we were hot-footing it up and down the Strip, seeing everything. You've got 5 cities in one here, really. We've seen the iconic things like the Sphere, the Eiffel Tower, some of the amazing hotels as well. But I have to say the favourite thing so far for me was actually our very romantic gondola ride with Alice Powell in the Venetian. Mini Little Venice was day one, I think that was. That was rather lovely.
And your side of the story, Alice, did you enjoy that too?
I enjoyed the man singing. We had then producer Paddy just sat staring at me and Harry, and it was lovely. But I think the Sphere has to be my highlight. It's not the cheapest thing to go and see. $94 to get an entry and watch. Well, it's like a show inside, but it is very impressive. And it looks great on the cameras and here when it's dark and the cars are going around the track. So that's probably my highlight so far. And I hope that the highlight's yet to come, the race.
Absolutely. I think my ridiculous purchase, just while we're talking about the cost of Vegas here, was my banana yesterday. $3.20. Try and trump that. Hey.
Didn't the cashier sort of apologise to you as well?
She said, I'm so sorry.
Well, she said, I've been away for 10 days and the prices have gone up. I was like, yeah, F1's in town, that's why.
Exactly. Andrew, have you been enjoying your time here? Because I know you find the schedule quite trying. Last year's schedule was even more difficult. So we're doing well so far. We've had no water valve covers popping open. It's kind of all staying on track, isn't it?
Yeah, we've had no 5:30 in the morning finish yet. I have, though, spent far too much time in the fast food court in this hotel because of the strange hours that you finish at. I'm sorry to be really boring. I've done a load of walking up and down the Strip. I had a very nice lunch in the Bellagio with a contact yesterday.
But won't tell us who, though.
I can't, no. But my highlight has to be my interview with Max Verstappen, which we'll hear a bit of later.
We certainly will. That's just a little teaser for you. So keep listening. We're going to have lots to chat about over the course of the next hour. But let's quickly reflect on Brazil, because the Sao Paulo Grand Prix was one of the greatest races we've seen in a long time. And it sort of leads us so nicely onto this weekend, which could be a huge weekend. Max Verstappen has his first chance to take his 4th driver's title tomorrow. Just a quick note there, of course, it's a Saturday race here in Vegas. That race in Sao Paulo, Andrew, I'm going to ask you about this because it was a critical win for Max Verstappen. He's described it as such. And Lando Norris, his biggest title rival, said it was a deciding moment, really, in this championship. How important was the last race?
Well, I think it's a defining moment in Formula One history. It's one of I think it'll go down as one of the greatest drives anyone's ever produced. Actually, it's funny. Harry and I were in the studio together before the race, and he was asking Sam Bird and I, Sam Bird was the co-commentator, where do we think Verstappen was going to finish? And I wanted to say I think he's going to win, but
let's just say, because obviously he was starting
17th
out of position
on the grid,
yeah,
and I just felt in my bones he was going to win it, and because it was raining and everything, but I couldn't bring myself to say it because it sounded so outlandish. So I went for podium in the end, and I really wish I had said that. But he was just brilliant, and it was one of those ones where one driver just looks on a completely separate plane from everybody else. So in that way, it was deserving of the sort of thing that would put him in the position that he's in now, which is like an almost dead cert championship win. But he's been really on a sort of separate level from everyone else all year, frankly. I think this might go down as his best championship in the end, because although they started the season so dominantly, from about Miami onwards, they didn't consistently have the fastest car. He won some races he definitely shouldn't have won. And when he didn't win, which was for a period of 5 months, let's not forget, between Spain in June and Brazil in November, he just kept banging in the best possible result he could get. He's absolutely humiliated Sergio Perez, his teammate. Now, okay, he's not the top level driver, but he's just been fantastic, and he fully deserves this championship that he's going to win. I don't think he's going to win it this weekend, actually, Rosanna. They had a difficult day, Red Bull, yesterday. You wouldn't expect the circuit to suit that car that well. I think Lando Norris will be okay. I think I don't know, but I've just got a feeling, like in Brazil,
in your bones,
that Norris will finish ahead and just keep it going.
I think just to come back to that drive with Verstappen in Brazil and being one of his best, if not the best win of anybody in Formula One. It's often what defines you, though, when we look at it, a championship overall, is how you bounce back from a rough patch of form or setbacks. Clearly something hasn't gone right within that team and the development path forward midway through the season, but also the hemorrhaging of top-level staff. Adrian Newey leaving the team. Jonathan Wheatley, the sporting director, will leave at the end of the year as well to go to the new Audi project at some point next year once his gardening leave is up. So I believe, and we'll hear it later, that Max Verstappen, I'm sure publicly, I think he has said, ideally, those people would have stayed, but that's not the case. So it's bouncing back not only from all the off-track noise, let alone what happened at the start of the year between Christian Horner and the allegations that he's always denied, and his father, Jos Verstappen, and them clearly not getting on. The fact that Max Verstappen has been able to continue his high level of performance week in, week out, I think it is extraordinary. He's 27 years old. He's about to become a 4-time world champion. The way he acts, he has no intention of staying here till he's 45, Fernando Alonso territory.
Even 40. He said he didn't want to be here then.
And I just think he is on another level that no one can replicate right now. And even though next year we're going to see a bit more convergence, because right now we're enjoying pretty good Formula One fighting right now. Next year, no regulation change. It's going to converge. It's going to get tighter. But Max Verstappen won't suddenly fall back into the pack. He will always come out on top and be leading the charge. I'm sure of that.
Alice, have you ever had a doubt when it came to Max Verstappen's potential to win this 4th title this year? Because at times it did look like they were really struggling.
Yeah, well, at the start of the year, we were like, oh, here we go again. Red Bull dominance. He's just going to sail into the distance every race. And then it slowly started to turn. And I don't think there was ever a point where I thought, oh, do you know what, Max is probably not going to win this. He just seems to grind out a result every single time. Even though maybe the Red Bull's not been the best at times, Max is still there somewhere around in the top 3. He still pulls out a result. And as Andrew said, that race a couple of weeks ago in Sao Paulo, where he was so far down the order, yes, he had a little bit of luck with the safety car, but that was just an absolutely spectacular drive from him in such tricky conditions. So no, there were moments where I thought it's going to be hard. He's going to get pushed to the very end. But certainly, I felt, in all honesty, that Max was probably still going to come out on top.
And of course, that's the huge talking point from Sao Paulo, the incredible drive from Max Verstappen, when actually, really coming into the Super Sunday, as we called it, because qualifying took place on the same day as the Grand Prix itself. It was all about Lando Norris, about how many points he was going to be able to claw back and get closer and closer to Max Verstappen. And Andrew, that just went away, didn't it? Lando Norris and McLaren unable to maximise when it really counted last time out.
Yeah, they were unlucky. He was running second to George Russell, having started on pole for the first sort of half of the race. And then it all turned on that safety car that Alice mentioned. Russell and Norris pitted for fresh tyres because the conditions were getting really, really bad. Russell didn't want to pit because he thought there was bound to be a safety car. Verstappen didn't pit. And that's what turned it around. Russell and Norris went down to 4th and 5th-ish. And Verstappen ended up second, and he only had Esteban Ocon's Alpine to pass after that. And I think everybody realised that was going to happen before long. And lo and behold, it did. So, had that safety car not happened at that time, had McLaren and Mercedes not made that decision to pit for fresh tyres, Russell and Norris they would have started the second part of the race ahead of Verstappen. They might still have beaten him. I don't think they would, but they might still have done. And maybe Norris wouldn't have finished quite so far down. But I agree with Alice. There's been, even when we were all thinking this might go to the wire, I don't think anybody really thought that Verstappen wasn't going to end up as champion. It's just, in the Brazil drive has just meant it's going to happen a little bit sooner than it looked like it might do for a while.
And I think that result in Sao Paulo has meant that Max Verstappen feels a little bit less pressure, a little bit more relaxed, whereas Lando Norris, I think, now feels almost resigned to the fact that it's not his year.
I don't think Verstappen feels pressure, or at least he doesn't give any impression of feeling pressure ever. He gets wound up in the car, obviously. We saw that in Mexico, but pressure I don't think is a thing that he does. Norris, he arrived here in Las Vegas basically saying, admitting that he's very honest, Norris, about where his head space is. He said he'd had a really tough week after Brazil, realising that everything he thought had been possible really wasn't anymore. And obviously it had been a difficult race for him. He made a couple of mistakes in the very wet conditions in the middle of the race. The McLaren team said, actually, we think we had a bit of a braking problem. So they didn't want to blame Norris, but of course, you don't know whether they're just trying to protect him a little bit. He'll bounce back. He's got a lot of lessons to learn from this year. His mindset is, this is my first chance.
But it could be the only chance, and that's the worry.
I don't think it'll be his only chance. I think I would expect McLaren to start next year possibly as favourites. What their development path has been very strong over the last couple of years. Why wouldn't they be competitive? But I think what he really ought to do over the winter is reflect on the fact that, yes, it might have been his first chance, but he's 6 years into his Formula One career, and he should be performing at his highest possible level right now. And I don't think he would think that this was his highest possible level. He admits it himself.
I don't think it will be his last chance forever. Lando Norris is an exceptional driver. He'll be in the fight if he's got a capable car. But the problem is, to your point, next season, with going back to that convergence chat, we've got the Ferraris coming on form. We're going to have Lewis Hamilton back in a Ferrari for the first time, with Charles Leclerc, who is a consequently good performer, let alone what's going to go on with the Mercedes team. Can they finally get something together before we get this regulation change? There's going to be more cars in the fight from the very start. Really, at the beginning of the year, it was only Red Bull who came out of the blocks straight away. That's what's won them this championship effectively, the hard work at the start of the year and Max Verstappen's phenomenal driving. Because when you think about it, the fact that it's only now that Max Verstappen can clinch the title, the longest season ever, 3 races left to go, it's actually pretty good going to keep it going for this long when we all arrived in Bahrain thinking, here we go. But for Lando Norris, I think it is going to be difficult next year if it continues like this, because Oscar Piastri, I think, is coming on. He's still got to iron out some issues that he's got when it comes to his performances on a consistent basis. But I think Piastri will be a cause for concern for Lando Norris if he continues the momentum that he's got, let alone all the other drivers I mentioned.
Maybe
as
a
well.
cause for concern for McLaren in terms of how they manage that, because we've seen that play out this year as well.
That was my next point. McLaren. How are they going to learn from their strategy calls, consistently being able to make the right calls when it matters, and how they deal with their 2 drivers? This papaya rules thing that we had a few rounds ago, that all got a bit messy unnecessarily so. They need to do some big learnings in the overall running of that team too.
Well, let's listen to a wonderful interview done by Andrew Benson earlier this week. You sat down with Max Verstappen, Andrew. We're going to have a listen to what Max had to say to you, because so many topics to get through in a short window of opportunity, I'm sure. So difficult to get all your questions answered, but I know you had a great chat with Max Verstappen on what could be another championship-winning weekend for the Dutch driver.
Max, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us ahead of this really important weekend. Obviously, you come into Las Vegas after what I and many people regard as one of, if not your greatest ever victory. How do you reflect on Brazil right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, looking back at it, it was a very crucial win, but it didn't really look like that was on the cards. Of course, starting P17, because, the day started really badly. My emotions went from being really upset with the situation to then, winning the race, which, was an incredible feeling, and I knew that that was a really important one.
Now, obviously, it's put you in a great position coming into this race weekend. How are you approaching it?
I still want to try and win the race, even though I still don't fully know how competitive we are going to be. Of course, the championship is in the back of my mind, naturally. I don't want to go around that, but I will always try to get the best result out of it first and then see what's possible.
Now, when you look at the season as a whole, it's been a really unusual one for Red Bull. I don't think I ever remember a team starting a season so strongly and then falling off to the degree that you have. I mean, obviously, it's not that bad still, but you've had some difficult times, and normally when a team starts dominant, they carry on that way. What exactly has happened?
I think it's 2 things. So we started very dominant, but I also feel like some teams didn't start well as they should have compared to last year. So we were a bit surprised with that. Looking at our own performances compared to last year's car, we're like, it's a bit weird how the others are not really making the step forward. So then I guess, they got their stuff sorted out. And I already said from the beginning of the year that I was not entirely happy with how the car was handling. And yeah, we just kept on putting our upgrades on the car, and we were still winning. And then they were getting closer and closer. Then at one point, naturally, when they're getting closer and closer, you have to try and risk more. You have to try and get more out of the car yourself, but then you feel like it's quite limited. And then at one point throughout the season, we realized that what we have been putting on the car, yes, and potentially might make the car quicker, but it's very difficult to drive. Then you start to backtrack on a lot of things, and you have to try and find when and where and how it happened. Where I wouldn't call it a wrong turn; it's just a different direction that made the car very difficult. And I think, from Mons onwards, that's really the point where I felt like we understood our issues and we started to work on it and improve it. Mm-hmm. Now, some track layouts, of course, haven't helped to show the improvements of the car. Street circuits, we know that that's our weakness, so that's never going to be, I think, great for now. And the others, they simply had a good run of form, but at the same time, with what they had as a package, they haven't optimized, and that's why we are still in the lead.
Did the championship ever feel under threat for you?
There were moments where the pace that they had, or like some other teams had in the race, were just unexplainable how quick they were, which it didn't make me worried that there's no chance that we can fight them. But at the other end, I also felt like we had to keep pushing, we had to keep working, to try and make quick turnarounds, quick decisions to make the car faster. And honestly, the team has been working flat out to bring all the bits that they have done for me also, to stay in that fight and at least try and limit the damage, I would say. We've had a tough time, but at the same time, I think the team has been working really well together to keep this performance on.
Now, just as the championship was starting to get to a really tense point around Austin, there was this big controversy about driving ethics between you and Lando. The drivers had a big conversation with the FIA after that race about the guidelines, and it felt in some ways that it was a consequence of what had happened in Austin. How did you feel about that? Did you ever feel like they were singling you out?
Honestly, I don't. Even if they would have done or did, I first of all, I don't care, because I drive to what I think is possible and what is allowed in the rules. And if the rules are written like that, I will use the rules. Yeah. So. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not the type of person that I think if that would have happened to me the other way around, this is then other people commenting on, other drivers commenting on that were not involved in that whatever incident or whatever you call it. I don't think I would have been the person then to complain so hard, because I would just think to myself that, okay, if that's the rules, that's how we do it.
Yeah.
Instead of screaming that we need to change the rules, because the problem is if you make less rules, and then something happens, then they will start screaming for more rules. Now we have the rules, maybe not perfect, but it will never be perfect. Because if we get to a certain rule set, there will be another incident where someone is not happy about, and then they start screaming that the rules are not correct again. But it's the same in football. If there's a foul and there are some clear rules about certain things, it's not always that the right decision is made on it. Or is a penalty given or not, or was it offside or not? Sometimes, that's why you can never, at the end of the day, do it right. Do I think that consistency in the penalties can be better? Yes, for sure. Mm-hmm. But that only comes with, I think, stewards that are paid, professional stewards. Not that I think that the stewards that we have right now, they're doing their very best to what they have, But I do think that in a sport like this, like you see in other sports as well, that when you have a paid board of stewards, I think it just works way better.
Yeah. You said something very interesting there about the rules, that you were always driving to the rules, and that's the fundamental point. I think no one said in Austin or thought that you'd done anything against the rules, but there was this particular kind of defence, the kind of race to the apex, trying to be ahead and all the rest of it, that people are talking about now. Do you think that just taking a step back from that particular incident, do you feel that that's the right way to go racing? Would you choose to do it that way if
No.
those weren't the rules? How would you like to do it?
Like I grew up with go-karting, where it's not about who is ahead of the apex or not. I think every driver is anyway a little bit different. I remember from go-karting as well. With some, you just knew that if you went around the outside, you could hang it around the outside, and with some others, you couldn't, because they would push you off.
Yeah.
And I think you need a little bit more freedom on that, because when is that clear rule that you need to be ahead or alongside fully to the apex, you will create other issues with that, right?
Yeah. So would you naturally want to give someone room on the outside on the exit if you were racing?
Well, me personally, I don't race like that.
What you don't? What? Sorry. What
Well,
do you mean?
it's like when I race with someone, he will not be able to overtake me around the outside.
Okay. Why?
Yeah. Because that's how I grew up racing.
Okay, so you always think it's okay to go to the edge of the track and force someone off?
Yes,
yeah,
but
okay.
I've raced against other people in go-karting that would give me space. You know,
Okay.
it's just a driver-related thing that some drivers are just a bit more passive, you know,
Yeah.
in racing, and that's just how they are. And some I know that even in F1 I can't hang it around the outside because it will push me off.
Yeah.
It's like a bit more of like a racing, I would say, instinct. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if you were to play the devil's advocate, how would someone ever overtake you? Because you will always go to the inside to defend. If you're then going to
It
go to
depends
the
on the
outside
track
of the track.
layout.
Yeah.
The problem, I think, the main problem is that when you have so much tarmac on the outside, you even if you lock up a little bit, you just run a little bit wide. But on old school tracks, you normally never really have these kind of issues because it just doesn't happen because people are a little bit more tentative on the brakes. Also, the guy that is trying to overtake knows that if he makes a mistake and locks up, he's in the gravel and his race is done.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I think is the problem is the track layout is letting us do these kind of like you then have questions with some moves. Where if you go to like Suzuka or even Red Bull Ring in turn 4, the downhill right-hander, where sometimes you're fighting as well. It's very rare that there's any like question mark move that has been done there, because if you make a mistake and you brake too late, you go off in the gravel and you're penalized anyway. Yeah. And I think we have to try and go back to these kind of things that when a driver goes off the track, it's a harsher penalty with just natural track limits.
So you would never give someone on the outside room on the exit of the corner if you were racing?
Well, that's just normally the case, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And of course, when the track is naturally the limit, with the gravel being there, then no one even want to go around the outside because they know that.
Yeah.
So you then try to go for a cutback or set yourself up in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Red Bull. There's been a lot of issues off the track this season as well as on it. The Horner situation at the beginning of the year, Adrian leaving, now Jonathan Wheatley. Has that been a distraction for you?
Well, I think in general, of course, for the team, we always, of course, would have preferred not to happen, these kind of things. Naturally, then, of course, when your performance is declining a little bit as a team, and then, people Adrian's leaving, and then, Jonathan at one point also said, he's leaving. It's not nice, but at the end of the day, you have to move forward quickly. You have to make decisions as a team, who you're going to promote. Because with the budget cap also, it's quite tricky. Back in the day when it was more unlimited, you could, if you wanted to buy 2 people extra, you could. Right now, it's quite complicated with the salary to give bonuses or get new people on board. But we are very confident with the people that we have. Now, I'm not going to lie, of course, that I would have naturally preferred people to stay, but that's what happens when you're successful. Other teams will try to get other people, and they will sacrifice 10, 15 juniors over one senior person, if you know what I mean, to get to keep within the budget cap. And honestly, I understand that, but it's never nice, of course, when it happens to you. Yeah. But honestly, Red Bull has done the same in the past. Mercedes has done the same in the past. Same like Ferrari. It's just a cycle that happens. You can say that you want everyone to stay together for a long time, but it's very rare that happens.
You've also had the situation where your team boss and your dad have basically been having an argument all year in public a lot of the time. How difficult has that been? I mean, have you had to take sides? How have you avoided not taking sides? Has that affected you in any way?
Well, I think what has always been very important is that I had a good relationship with Christian and, of course, with my dad. My dad, of course, thinks about me. Has the best interest in me, what I want to do and how I'm, in the team. He, of course, had his questions, but at the same time, I was also very busy with dealing with the performance of the car and trying to make that better. But at the end of the day, I think you could see that, now everyone is everyone is normal. Everyone is, dealing with it. Everyone is just focusing on the performance side of things. People do not need to be best friends. I mean, they don't need to go on holiday together. Mm-hmm. But I feel like you can have a normal working relationship, which I think is the case. absolutely. And especially, I think lately, I think it's going much better. But sometimes, I always said as well that, when you have problems with each other or you're not happy with something, you talk, you communicate, right? You speak to each other. And I think that's always way better than, throwing anything in the media or whatever. And I've said that to both of them. And that's why also, it was not for me about picking a side, just speaking a bit of common sense, I think. And,
to both of them? So you were like the adult in the room almost?
I don't know. I don't want to call myself the adult in the room because, they're older than me and I think they're wise enough to know what they have to do. But I like to, of course, also share my opinion about things and how I think it's better for everyone to work. And I think that worked out well at the end.
And how do you view your future? You've got a Red Bull contract till 2028, but Toto Wolff's made it clear he wants you to join Mercedes as soon as possible. Now Adrian Newey's gone to Aston Martin. That might be interesting. What are you thinking about all that stuff?
I'm very relaxed about everything, to be honest, because if you tell me, Max, you need to stop tomorrow for whatever reason, not that I want to stop, but that's also fine. If you tell me, Max, you need to continue to drive for 6 more years, that's also fine. So I'm not worried about anything. Of course I want to win, and of course if the performances are not there, then of course it's naturally harder when you have been used to winning. But at the same time, my desire is, and honestly this is how I saw it when I signed my new deal, is it would be an amazing story if basically I did my whole F1 career with one team. I think that it's pretty special because I do value my time also at Toro Rosso, but I was already part of the whole Red Bull family. But again, 26 for me is also a big question mark, where it's not only performance-wise, but how is the car? Like, is it fun to drive? Is it going to be nice? Is it what I like? To dedicate 24 weekends a year for, and all the work, of course, next to it. That is something that is very difficult to judge at the moment. I know that also I want to do other stuff in life. And I definitely don't want to be racing in F1 until I'm 40 years old, because that's basically that I spent half of my life racing cars, and then I have another 40 years to live, but that's, a bit older already. I want to also have fun in life, and I want to spend time with my family and friends, because at one point I also know that now, I know, like I keep telling myself, sometimes when I see my mom calling or my dad calling, and I'm busy or whatever, you're like, oh, I can't really pick up. But I also know there will be a day that they won't be ringing me anymore because they won't be here anymore, so I want to make the best out of that as well, to spend as much time with them when they are still in a good shape, and we can all enjoy life together because of also what they have dedicated from their lives, to get me here. And that is honestly way more important than going from 4 titles potentially to 7 or 8.
But you could break all the records, Max. Do you care?
No.
You don't want to?
No, I don't need to. When you've already achieved so much, it's not about wanting to drive forever. I also want to just enjoy life, and you only live once, and I don't want to spend half of it racing cars.
Guys, I found it fascinating. So many subjects covered and such candour from Max Verstappen, Andrew. You were obviously there, looking him in the eye. What an in-depth interview, and I love the fact that you really got to the bottom of how he goes racing.
Yeah, that was the thing I really wanted to do most of all, I think. It's obviously been a controversy, not just this year, but all the way through since he had his championship fight with Lewis Hamilton in 2021. The echoes of Verstappen's fight with Norris in Austin were very much the same as what happened with Hamilton in 21 at a few races. And he's never really talked about it in depth. He's always tried to sort of brush those questions aside. I just had a feeling that he would get into it. I don't know why. And he really did. And I think the key line from that for me was, that he won't let someone overtake around the outside. I found that just quite remarkable, an admission, because it should be possible to overtake someone around the outside. And I think there are some questions to be asked there about whether it should be appropriate that someone just thinks it's okay to shove someone off the track if they're going around the outside of them. But that's how Verstappen races, and he says he's been doing it since he was a kid. And it does raise the question, as I asked him in the interview, how do you actually overtake someone like that if their modus operandi is to defend to the inside and then push you off the track on the outside? It's really, really difficult for the other drivers.
But I think that's the old school way of racing, and we know from his karting days when he was younger, his dad was always there pushing him, and some people said that he was a bit too harsh on Max. And I always remember sort of when I started karting a long time ago, before Max as well, back in 2001, everyone at the junior levels at that was said, never let anyone overtake you around the outside. If they're going around the outside, push them off onto the grass. And you could actually at that time get away with it. You certainly can't now. If you go to kart circuits now, it's really frowned upon. It's frowned upon in junior categories and Formula One. But what I got from that Max interview was he plays to the rules, like he said about being ahead at the apex. He said, well, that's the rule, so that's what I do. Doesn't matter if I have to roll off the brake and squeeze the other person off the track. If the rule is the rule, if I'm ahead at the apex, then that's my corner. I'm not going to get a penalty. Whether we like it or not, unfortunately, that is the rule, and whether it's correct, who knows? It's questionable, but he's just saying, well, I don't care whether it's right or morally right or wrong. I'm not going to let you go around the outside. I'm just going to say, roll off the brake and off you go.
One of the things that's interesting is that you can go back on YouTube and find a video of a karting event back in, I don't know when it was, but when Verstappen and Charles Leclerc were around about 12, 13, 14, I think, and Leclerc's walking back to the pits and they've obviously had a collision, and he goes, there was an incident. Yeah. And it's become a real sort of meme in Formula One. Leclerc's one of those people who knows that this is how Verstappen races, and he's been upset by him in the past. Austria in 2019, he lost a win to this kind of driving, but the next race in Silverstone, he obviously decided, right, enough's enough, I'm going to race like Max does. And the two of them had this most spectacular fight for about half of the British Grand Prix, one of the best bits of racing I think I've ever seen. So I think you can get to a place with Verstappen as a driver where he'll engage with you at that level, but you've got to get to such a high level of skill to do it. And it's not always possible to do that, I think. That's my interpretation of it.
But I think if you don't get penalised for it, then you think, well, I can just do it and get away with it. And he'll know the drivers out there that he can push, and you could say bully is not the right word, but I guess it is bully out on the circuit. And there'll be others where we go, okay, maybe I can't get away because this driver's not going to concede the corner, or we'll risk contact with this driver. So you do as a driver get to know your competitors that you're racing against.
The rules are so tricky to police, and that brings me nicely on to another big topic of the week. We've got a new race director, Niels Wittich, who used to be the race director and has been since the departure of Michael Massey a couple of years ago. We were told that he stepped down. It's now turned out that actually he was fired and he didn't want to leave. He's going to be replaced this weekend by Rui Marquez, who's been presiding over the F2 and F3 feeder series as a race director. So he's got experience, but Harry, 3 races from the end of the season. It's a championship decider weekend. This is a big moment for Rui Marquez. And what does it say about where we are with the FIA right now?
Well, I feel a bit for Rui Marquez, because this is not the time when you change out what is effectively the referee on the first weekend where the Drivers' Championship can be decided. And as you say, with 3 races left to go, I can't understand that. Niels Wittich has stepped down, and I use that in quotation marks because we discussed this on practice yesterday. There's been a lot of people stepping down from their senior roles, but the story is not quite as it would be there. I think this just is another story within what is going on at the FIA at the top level right now. It seems to be that it's in a bit of anarchy and chaos under the president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, and something is not going on there. The drivers aren't happy with how the FIA is treating them. There was an open letter spearheaded by George Russell from the Grand Prix Drivers Association, effectively calling out the FIA. And it's not even been acknowledged by the FIA. There's not even been a response to it either. And these are your stars of the sport going against what is the governing body of the pinnacle of motorsports. It shouldn't be two organisations within the same sport butting heads like this. There's something inherently not right going on at the top level right now within the FIA. It needs to be cleared out. I don't think Niels Wittich leaving, being sacked, stepping down before the end of the year solves anything. I don't really think there was much indication that Wittich was deserving to be sacked before the end of the year. Yes, there's always some sort of incidents. I think the red flag in qualifying in Sao Paulo has been brought up as maybe the tipping point or the delay and how long that took to come out. But I just don't quite understand why it's happened before the end of the year. I think it's petty.
I don't think the drivers do or the teams do. Just to be clear on Niels Wittich, I got in touch with him after this happened, and on the question of whether he voluntarily left or didn't. He said, "I can confirm I got fired, and it was not my decision to leave F1." So I think, let's not beat around the bush. The FIA this year has lost a sporting director, a technical director, a chief executive officer, a race director, and also in the same week as Wittek, the compliance officer. And that was the compliance officer who looked into the allegations of race manipulation by Mohammed Ben Sulayem that BBC Sport reported earlier this year. There's very serious questions about what's happening in in the FIA and within Formula One. Much concern about that. The issue, I think, for the whole sport, as the bosses would see it, although they're not saying so in public, although I can assure you they are doing in private, is that they can't get rid of Ben Sulayem because it's not up to them. It's up to the FIA electorate, the member clubs around the world, and but it is definitely the case that people within the sport are beginning to ask, what are we going to do about this situation?
Has there been a more... The FIA is not the first time we've had controversy within the FIA and the president and the top level. But I wonder, Andrew, can you remember, has there ever been more packed into one season alone involving the FIA of such controversy and top level people leaving the team, hemorrhaging people effectively?
The hemorrhaging people thing, definitely not. There's been, there's not been that many FIA presidents in the history of modern Formula One. And they've all been, quite unique personalities. Mm-hmm. Jean-Marie Balestre, a Frenchman who ran the FIA, or FISA as it was called then, in the sort of 80s and early 90s, he was bonkers. And if you watch the Senna documentary, you can see him getting involved in issues of race manipulation. It's what got Senna so angry at the 1990 Japanese Grand Prix, and over the year before that, between the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix and the 1991. Max Mosley was a much more calm, urbane character, but he also angered a lot of people behind the scenes because he was such a Machiavellian, manipulating character, highly political, intimidating in lots of different ways, threatened people in one way or another. Jean Todt was a much more quiet presence, but still dictatorial in his own way. And now we've got Ben Sulayem, who, I really shouldn't use some of the words people have used to describe him, but just very high degrees of unhappiness within Formula One. And the FIA are not engaging with anybody. They're not engaging with the drivers. They're saying that one of the issues that the drivers have, why they've written the letter that they wrote, the open letter a couple of weeks ago, why George Russell complained in the press conference on Wednesday, is because they're just not getting anything back, or they get promises and nothing happens from them. It's the same with the media. You ask them for a comment about why someone's gone, has he been fired or not, you just nothing back. On the issues of race manipulation earlier in the year, I asked for a comment about those because we broke that story. 9 days went by. I didn't get anything at all. It's just extraordinary.
Why do you think that is, Andrew? Why do you think they're being like this, especially with the drivers who without the drivers there'll be no race, there'll be no show?
I think because they just don't think they have to, and they don't want to engage. I mean, I can't speak for them because they're not saying why. They're just not responding.
Didn't you find it ironic that we were sitting in an FIA press conference when the drivers were being quizzed about all of this, with several people there wearing FIA jerseys, and you think, this is just very strange. What a strange situation that they can't get a reply from the FIA, and yet they're sitting in the FIA press conference.
And it further highlights that the relationship between Formula One and the FIA is still not in a good place. I mean, the middle of the season, it was in a pretty rough place, I think. But when you've got, I lose track of time, whether it was earlier this year or last year, when the president was sort of putting almost a number on how much Formula One was worth. And in the end, Formula One had to send him a cease and desist letter to the president of the governing body. The relationship is not good right now. And that's no good for anybody. It's no good for us wanting to report on the sport and tell the stories that are happening on the track when everything is just clouded by what is happening off it. Well, it is good. We've been spending about 10 minutes chatting about this now, so it's great stuff. Keep it coming. But at the end of the day, we want to be talking about, that amazing overtake or the up and down storylines throughout the track, not the squabbles that are going on at the top level and managerial sides, that needs to be sorted out, because it's only going to end badly for somebody. And it's not a good look for the sport.
Well, another big story that broke in the early hours of this morning was that we may have another team on the grid. We could maybe see 11 teams. Andrew, we found out about this late last night over a slice of pizza. Where are we at then with an Andretti bid, perhaps even a GM bid? What's the latest?
So it looks rather like GM, General Motors, one of the biggest car companies in the world, is going to enter Formula One in 2026. It's not confirmed yet, but it's very much heading in that direction. This has come out of the Andretti bid that people might remember was rejected by Formula One in January this year after the FIA accepted them, which, by the way, was another dispute between the FIA and F1.
It all segues nicely, doesn't it?
But it's not Andretti. That's being made very clear. I don't quite know how it's come about. It's all a bit of a murky situation, because the guy who's taken over from Michael Andretti as the head of Andretti Racing, a guy called Dan Towis, he's here in Las Vegas trying to get this bid over the line, but we're being told that it's not Andretti that are going to be doing it. I wonder whether actually somehow they will, but that's not what's being said at the moment. But I think the way, as to why this has been looks like it's going to be accepted now and wasn't before, I think Formula One are viewing it in a different way. The previous one was Andretti coming in with a customer engine, and GM saying we will do an engine down the line in a couple of years. This is GM coming in with their own team, and also promising that they're going to do their own engine a couple of years down the line. So it might not sound that different to the people listening, but from Formula One's perspective, that is different. A manufacturer commitment as opposed to a private entity, which I think people weren't that convinced that Andretti were going to be competitive, and that's why that was the reasoning behind why they were rejected. And
no character politics at play here. There's no issue with Michael Andretti.
I think there is some character politics for sure. Michael Andretti rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. They saw that they felt that people in Formula One, within Formula One, the organisation, and also with the other teams, they felt that he had quite an abrasive approach to trying to get him into Formula One. That's not the way Formula One likes to work. It likes to be much more quiet and smooth. So quite a few people took umbrage at that. So I'm not saying that's why they rejected the bid, but the fact that Michael Andretti is not involved anymore has definitely not harmed GM's attempt to get in now.
Well, that story is going to develop, and of course you'll be able to keep abreast of what's going on the BBC Sport website when we find out more. Let's bring it back to this weekend then. We are getting excited for the final practice session, and then of course qualifying a little later on to set the grid for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And while we've been here in Vegas, Harry Benjamin's taken the time to sit down with Kevin Magnussen, who's one of the drivers who won't be on the grid, it seems now, in 2025, driving for Haas at the moment. He's left the sport a couple of times already. Will he be back in the future? Not sure about that. I know he wants to have a role of some kind still within the sport, but let's find out what he's been chatting to Harry about, perhaps sharing blackjack tips together at the Bellagio Hotel.
Kev, thanks for joining us. Second time in Las Vegas. How much down are you in the casino?
Not at all yet, but let's see how the weekend goes. No, it's a great event. It's one of the most hyped races of the year, and last year was great. It was full of superstars. Everywhere you looked, there was another superstar. So it was like a very hyped event, and pumped to go again this year.
Is it a bit overwhelming? Can you take us sort of inside the cockpit of your car when you're going around these streets, over 300 kilometers an hour, especially down that back straight, but you've got the massive sphere, all of the neon signs everywhere. Are you able to stay focused around a lap, or is it a little bit like, oh, what's going on over there?
No, for sure. You notice all the, you notice where you are. And usually you don't really notice, if let's say some of the other street tracks like in Baku or whatever, they're cool tracks, but you don't really know where you are, like which part of the city you're driving in or whatever. It's just the track, and when they remove the track, like in an off weekend, if you drive around the city, you don't notice where the track goes and all that. So it's cool to drive down the strip because you know exactly where you are in Las Vegas, right? So it's like driving a Formula One car in a city and not just on a track. So you really feel like it's just a unique feeling. It's really cool.
So in terms of, we're at the beginning of this sort of triple header towards the end of the season. We've got the fight on track, but also it's the end of your season, the end of your career with Haas. But you're a bit like a cat with 9 lives when it comes to Formula One. So this is not the end, is it? If there's an opportunity to drive 2026, would you come back?
I don't know. I think it depends on the situation and where I'm at and what's on the table. If there's a good opportunity, then yes, you'd have to really look at it. Of course, I don't know. I've had many years in Formula One. It's been really cool. I've spent a long time in the midfield. So if there was a opportunity to drive, a more competitive car towards the front of the field, that would obviously be a dream. But of course, it's. I don't know how good the chances are of that.
Well, never say never. Have you found it difficult? I know you're saying there a lot of the time when you're in the midfield, you're not racing in the points. You've done it for a while. How is the mentality with that as a racing driver, where you're going into a weekend knowing that, well, maybe if we're lucky, we might get a P10?
It's one of the things you have to get used to, getting to Formula One, unless, of course, you get with a top team immediately. If you hadn't been winning regularly and really getting championships and all that on your way to Formula One, you wouldn't get to Formula One. So you're used to winning. You're used to thinking about winning all the time. You're used to expecting that, and then you get to Formula One. If you're with a midfield team, there's just no point in expecting that. That's actually just gonna hurt you. You're gonna be frustrated and disappointed all the time. And sometimes the best you can do is a P5 or P7 or something like that, and you have to be proud of that and happy about that, which can be tough. As a sportsman, you want to win. Of course, that's otherwise, if you're not a competitive person, you wouldn't be here. So it's a bit strange.
We'll talk about sort of frustration and I suppose annoyance. A lot of this year and indeed the last few races, there's been a lot around driver guidelines and the FIA rulings of how we go racing and the way penalties applied. We don't need to say what's happened to you this year with penalties, forced with a 1 race ban. The FIA has just changed the race director with 3 races to go. What do you view all of that as? Is it unnecessary noise? Is it chaos within the FIA right now? And if you were in charge next year, what would you change? How would you go racing in Formula One? Because we know you like to get your elbows out.
Yeah, and I think it's. I think certainly what I think is cool about racing is the battles. A big part of it, of course. What do I love about racing? Of course, it's the cars. It's driving the cars. But at the end of the day, it's the competition and the battling. And I think you need to be able to battle hard. I think that makes it more exciting. I think we have a problem in Formula One with the tracks. I think that those are actually the biggest problem, because the tracks have all this runoff. At the outside of the white lines, there's just no natural consequence. So the FIA, of course, are trying to come up with some sort of consequence for driving outside the lines. And this goes in everything. On a quali lap, if you go too quick through a corner, you at the exit of the corner, you'll go over the white line and you get your lap deleted, which is like on a proper track you would just go in the dirt and
It'd
lose
be a natural penalty.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that would look spectacular even on television, and it'd be something to watch. And I think in the battling as well, if the tracks were better, FIA could stay out of it, because we have all these different situations where someone is trying to overtake on the outside and the guy on the inside releases the brakes, and then the outside guy reacts to that, and both of them run out of the track, like Max and Norris in Austin, which just looks clumsy and not very good. If the tracks were better, FIA didn't have to do anything.
It's trying to find that balance, isn't it, between spectacle and not interfering too much with the natural play of order and the competition that we all tune in every week to watch. Well, look, Kev, if there's no seats on the grid next year for you, there is definitely a seat alongside me in the BBC commentary box, if you fancy it, for 2025.
All right.
Deal. Well, we got that on record, everyone. Cool. Everyone heard that? Good, we're in.
Sweet.
Kev, look, 3 more races to go. Wish you the best of luck and a great end to the year for you and Haas.
Harry, I don't think it was a yes. I think it was an all right.
I'll take it. I will take it. K-Mag in the box next year. Absolutely. I think that'll be a great win. Sorry,
we just lost our job.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a tight commentary box here in Vegas. And again, maybe race director for Kevin Magnussen or even FIA president. Could you imagine? That would go full circle, wouldn't it? Right, then what can we expect this weekend? Do we expect the unexpected in Las Vegas? We had Lewis Hamilton top of the timesheets for both FP1 and FP2, the two practice sessions. But is that a little bit of a false dawn? Do we see them slipping back and perhaps a Ferrari up at the front or even the McLarens?
I mean, Lewis Hamilton said yesterday after the two practice sessions, or was it today? I get mixed up of when it was on this time zone, that he was quite surprised by the performance of the Mercedes. And of course, he's hoping that it isn't a one-off. In the final practice session yesterday, 11 hundredths quicker than Lando Norris, and George Russell was then 2/10 down the road from him. But it's a track that should suit the Mercedes a lot better. It's nowhere near as bumpy as Sao Paulo. You've got the long straights, street circuit, of course, and the big factor is that it's cool. We were sat in the or I certainly was sat in the commentary box yesterday with my woolly hat on and my puffy coat because it is cold here, so that should suit them. But qualifying is later on, and it's going to be tough to get those tyres up to temperature. And we've seen plenty of drivers locking up and overshooting, especially at turn 14. And when the pressure's on and you've got to set a lap time and you do have a mistake like that, that could be your qualifying over. So for any of those drivers out there, whether they think that they've got a good car or not, a small mistake like that could see you going out in the first part of qualifying.
The track was so dusty yesterday. You could see the dust in the air as the drivers went down the start-finish straight. I was in the pit lane. You could just see the dust. Obviously, you can see it clearer because it's illuminated with the incredible lights around the circuit. But is that going to be any better today, Harry? Are they going to have more grip, do you think?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? That's why Thursday practice, it was so difficult to get a real idea of the actual true pecking order because this track, no Formula One cars would be running on it. We've got very little support action. We've got some Ferraris racing around in the gaps in between. But on paper, it should be a little better because the F1 cars have been on track yesterday and rubbered things, and there is a bit more of a darker line either side on the racing line where the dust gathers off of it. But the track's reopened, parts of it, to the public, to cars going around. That's going to bring lots of track and rubbish as well. So it might be a bit better. We'll see.
Very quickly then, we've got qualifying later on. Who do we see as the front runners then when it comes to pole position? And does that translate then into perhaps the race result as well, Andrew?
I fancy Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari for pole. He looked good yesterday, even though he wasn't that high in over the one lap times, but he was quickest on the race simulation runs. Mercedes, I think, makes sense for them to be quick, but I fancy Ferrari and McLaren.
Harry, what about you? You went big in our preview podcast on McLaren.
No, I went on big on
Verstappen.
Verstappen. I'm not going to back out of that completely. I will stick to my guns. I'm not convinced on pole. I think the race will be a different story for Verstappen. Ferrari going to be strong. You know what? I'm actually going to go for Lando Norris pole. I think.
Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
Pluck that out there. I think so. I think Verstappen will still steal the championship this weekend.
Okay, so then the race gets a bit spicier in your eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Alice, what about you? Who have you got in the
Well,
book?
I did say in our preview podcast that I agreed with Andrew, Charles Leclerc, but I'm going to go different. That's not. I won't copy, or he copied me, so he stole my answer. I'm going to go for a Mercedes. I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton because he is looking particularly strong here this weekend.
So you think that the form they showed yesterday could actually be true form, and is that because of these colder temperatures you were talking about?
I think that plays a big part. That will play a big part. The track, it's these long straights. We go down the strip. That's going to help. Certainly doesn't help the Red Bull at all. But these conditions. Saying that it is going to be slightly warmer later on for qualifying, not by a huge amount. But it's still quite chilly for a Formula One race and qualifying session.
And what chance of some stoppages then? I think we're all stoppaged out after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. But of course, it is a street track. It's incredibly fast. Water valve cover last year, we haven't seen that yet. And obviously, people can lose concentration. Harry, you mentioned it in your K-Mag interview. Big landmarks, suddenly take your eye off the ball and you're in the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Your eye can wander, but no, these are Formula One drivers at the top level. They don't get distracted by things like that. So far, it's been fairly clean, it has to be said. We had one red flag flag in free practice 2 for Alex Albon, who was having issues anyway and just stopped out on track with a fuel issue. And that brought out a red flag. They wheeled him off. So no actual sort of incidents, but that is always the jeopardy around here. It is fast. It is tight and twisty in elements around this street track. You go from over 350 kilometers an hour down the Las Vegas Strip into a heavy braking zone in 14. Then you have almost a really tight chicane. Charles Leclerc was getting so close to the walls yesterday. They had this graphic on the Formula One TV screens of how super close a driver gets, and he was winning that battle for sure. So all it takes is for one momentary lapse of concentration, and suddenly that can change the game for qualifying, where you are on track. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, your lap could well be scuppered. We saw a bit of that last year.
Oh, plenty to look out for. Then we got the final practice session a little later on. We're going to head into the track fairly soon, and then qualifying at 6 a.m. to set the grid for the Vegas Grand Prix. Do you put it on red or do you put it on Red Bull this weekend? That is the big question.
Very good, Rosanna.
I've had that ace up my sleeve all hour long.
Stop it. Wrap it up.
Oh, dear. Well, we'll have live commentary for you across the weekend. And, of course, you can read all of Andrew Benson's articles on the BBC Sport website as well.